All right, it's 4 o'clock now. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to join, as I see a lot more people keep joining. So at 4:05, we will start this chat. All right. Just a reminder for everyone, if you want to ask any questions, please put them in the Discord and upvote any questions that you would find interesting and also want to be asked. All right, why don't we get started? I'm William Pfluger. I will be the moderator for this Fireside chat with Gayle McDowell. I am a senior at Columbia studying computer engineering and finance. And so, Gayle, could you please introduce yourself to all of our wonderful participants I mean, I'm sure that so many people here in CS know who you are and have read your books, but would you please give us some of your background?
Sure. So I'm Gayle McDowell. I am the author of that big, fat, green coding book, interview book that you have hopefully seen around. So I wrote Cracking the Coding Interview, and as well as a couple other books. I also wrote Cracking the PM Interview, which is, same idea, but for product managers. And Cracking the Tech Career, which is a little bit different. It's more of a like, how do you get a job in tech? And I'm actually working on a fourth book right now that is likely to be called Cracking the PM Career, and it's kind of the job training guide for product managers. So my background actually comes from computer science. I went to Penn for bachelor's and master's computer science, and then went to Google for a while. Also worked a bit at Microsoft and Apple. And at Google, I did, obviously I was a software engineer, so that was 98% of my job. But I was at Google during a time of rapid growth. And so I got brought in to do a whole lot of interviewing because at most tech companies, as you probably know, the interviews are done by other engineers. So I got brought in to do a ton of interviewing, and then they invited me on to join the hiring committee, which is, the committee of people who actually looks through the interviews, looks through the feedback, and figures out who actually gets an offer. And so I've reviewed a ton of packets. And then after that, I went to a small startup for a little while, and then kind of started working a lot more on my business, which is called Career Cup now, which is, forum around interview questions, and then also does the books. And then I also do the other side of my business that a lot of you may not be aware of is I also work with bigger tech companies on their hiring process. So I take a lot of the stuff I've seen from candidates and sort of flip it around and say, okay, so how can we make the candidate experience better? How can we ask more effective questions? And it's sort of the opposite, but also complements itself really nicely. And so I kind of split my time between the books and interview, preparing stuff for candidates, and then the other side, which is getting companies to do better interviews.
Awesome. And so how did you get into this world of advising people versus like what made you want to write this book, the coding and interview book?
Good questions. And depending on which part I focus on, I'll talk about different aspects. But part of it was that when I was in college, I was TA at Penn for a class that did at Penn, we called them recitations, a review section once a week that everyone was mandated to attend. And so I did a lot of teaching, and I really loved the process of taking a hard concept and breaking it down so that people can understand it. So that was kind of a piece of it. And then another piece was being an engineer and getting involved in the hiring process. I would see a lot of candidates who kind of had a gut instinct, like, objectively they didn't do well, but I also kind of feel like maybe they could have on a better day with a different mindset towards interviewing. And that was kind of the other aspect. And the third one was I actually, kind of already had Career Cup, already had this website around interview questions. And so I wrote the books to kind of blend all those things together and say, okay, now let's help candidates not do better than they are, but do as well as they actually, to actually fully show that they are talented. And so, took that website and kind of started writing books based on that.
And you've had a lot of success on that.
Thank you.
And so what is it that you saw that candidates often like failed in doing in the interviews? You said that people were often talented enough, but they had a bad day, and they could have done better. Is there any kind of specific things that you saw people doing that they, just common mistakes?
Yeah. So what was happening when I first started out it's still happening now, but it's interesting. You're kind of seeing the same behavior, but in a different way. Or with different kind of reasons behind it. But one of the big things is people walking into interviews, getting a question and think, I should know how to do this question. And so they're asked, okay, given this binary search tree, do this thing to it. And they kind of when I first started off, it was people thought that they're being quizzed on stuff from a textbook. And they're like, oh, sorry, I don't know how to do that. And now it's a little bit different. I think a lot of candidates, particularly the ones who are in college or recently out of college, kind of know that these are not stuff you're actually supposed to already know, but now it's shifted to now they think that the game is study as many interview questions as possible, memorize all the answers, and then just spit back out the right answer. And the problem with that as an interviewer is it's kind of not at all the point. It's like you're going into a math test, and as it turns out, you already know what this derivative is because you memorized that answer. And the teacher's like, but I'm not asking if you know that answer. I'm asking if you can find the answer. And so what we're seeing now a lot of is candidates walking in thinking that the best case scenario is that they know the answers to the questions. And in fact, what you want even as a candidate is that you don't know how to solve the problems, because then the interviewer actually gets to see you solve them. If you already know how to solve them, they aren't interviewing you and they end up having to reject you or do something different.
Yeah, I know in say math classes, teachers often say, show your work, even if you get the wrong answer, you can still get, partial credit.
Exactly.
And in your books, you said that it's important to show off your thought process and show the interviewer how you are thinking and why you're coming up to these specific answers. Because even if you, get the correct answer, you may have had flawed, logic, or again, they might have just memorized it. So
yeah.
I see definitely how showing your work is very important. And
exactly.
So,
and one of the, if I can jump in there, one of the differences between I like the math analogy a lot. That's why I use it. But one of the things that's different is that on a math test, you're given a test and then you do it and you turn it in at the end of the, at the end of the hour, and the teacher kind of judges you from that. Here, your teacher is side by side with you in an interview. And so they're saying, oh, actually, that's a little bit wrong. Or, why don't you try this approach? And it's so important to quote unquote show your work, because they're actually going to be there helping you. They're going to be what I do as an interviewer, if you're ever unlucky enough to actually interview with me, what I do is I ask you a question that, look, you probably, even though my best candidates probably can't solve it in 45 minutes independently, but it's not independent because I'm there and I'm helping you. And the more that you show your work, you explain your thought process, the more that I can jump in to guide you. And so it's so important to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the big things with interviewers and especially for candidates to think about is like the interviewer is not there to stump you and make you fail. They want to see how you would thrive in such a company, and they want you to succeed. I feel like most recruiters want the candidates that they're talking
Absolutely.
to be doing well, and so it's very rare that an interviewer will want you to struggle and fail. Struggling is good, but like again,
yeah.
There's a limit to that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I want to ask you a question. I want you to be able to dig yourself out of the pit, but I'm going to give you a pit. But I'm going to make it not too deep for you. But I want to see how you dig yourself out. And so in a sense, I want you to struggle in that if you aren't struggling because you just know the answers, I'm not seeing problem solving. But I'm also not going to give you such an overwhelmingly hard problem and then just not help you at all. There's a right amount of struggling, and I'm going to adjust how much help I give you depending on how much help you need, which is based on your own performance, but it's also based on the difficulty of the problem.
And so how would you say that interviewers, score the candidates? So given that, they give a problem that they expect no one to, be able to solve and code in 45 minutes, like what are the key things that candidates should be looking out to do, make sure that they, get written down, make sure, to say something, and like, what are the interviewers like scoring them off of that?
Sure. So some of you may have heard this, the old quote that I'm probably going to totally botch, but it's something like, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than your friend, right? You're like outside hiking and you and your friend see a bear. You don't have to outrun the bear. You can't outrun the bear, but you have to be faster than your friend, right? And in reality, that's more or less what's happening with interviews is when the comparison is relative. And that doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I have this job opening and I hire the best person. Of course, sure, I'm going to try to hire the best person. But at many of the big tech companies, there is sort of infinite number of job openings. So there's no like best of this candidate pool. What I mean by relative comparison is that when I look at like how, what grade do I want to give this person on this problem, I look at how did you perform on that problem relative to other people I've asked that problem to. And it might not even have been people I've asked this problem to in the last 3 months. It could be people, it's relative to people everybody I've ever asked a problem to. And I say, how good did you see? And how I evaluate how good you are is based on a couple different things. At a high level, it's the kind of problem solving skills, and a really simplistic way of thinking about that a lot of companies don't want to say because it gets people upset, but it's also, I think, the most intuitive way is, did you seem like a smart person? Which is not about how many minutes it took you to get to the answer, because the smarter you are, the less help I'm going to need to give you, and thus it's going to take you longer. But also when you're struggling more, it's also going to, when you're weaker at problem solving, that's also, so it's not number of minutes. It's kind of this intuitive feel of like, did you seem smart? Did you seem like you could solve the harder pieces of the problem better than other people? And so that's one piece, is a kind of that problem solving. So it's sort of about speed, but it's not number of minutes per se. And then the other piece of it is, did you demonstrate a basically adequate foundation in computer science? So if you didn't know what a binary search tree is, that's going to be a problem, obviously. And then your code. So did you demonstrate the ability to write good code? And did you show me that you care about writing good code? Because it doesn't do me any good to hire someone who can write good code, but also doesn't care to do so. And then there's this other piece that's sort of personality based. And this is going to depend a lot from interviewer to interviewer and company to company. But as a general rule of thumb, a company or an candidate, or sorry, an interviewer at least, who knows what the heck they're doing, which not everybody does, but a competent interviewer is going to just reject anybody who comes off as a jerk. Beyond that, some companies are going to emphasize certain personality traits more than others. And that's hopefully not like, are you outgoing or shy? But it may be, they may look more for teamwork and collaboration than another company. But that not a jerk test is pretty universal at any kind of competent company, which not all companies are competent though. So.
Gotcha. And so I know a lot of people would probably be wondering about if you're not memorizing the answers and memorizing the stuff in computer science, if you have a good enough CS background, how would you recommend people going about preparing for the interviews? I know there's a whole long process that you describe in your cracking the coding interview book for leading up to the interview. But can you give some highlights from that and what people should be doing, say, right now in the middle of the job search season?
Sure. So one big thing I'd say is it's quality over quantity. So some people, like I see posts all the time on like hackathon hackers and various groups are like, I've done 592 problems. I'm like, really? That's a lot of time. If you've really been solving all of these problems without like just looking up the answers, that is an insane amount of time you've spent. And most people who are spending that much time doing that many problems are kind of looking at a problem, thinking about it, and then when they don't know the answer, they kind of give up when they look it up. And that's not that helpful. And it actually can really hurt you, because what it does is it gets you in this mindset of, when I don't know the answer, I can't figure it out myself, and I need to just look it up. And when it comes to interview, you're out of luck, because either you know the answer and you try to basically cheat your way through the process, and then you get rejected for cheating, or you don't know the answer, and then you haven't actually developed the skills to get yourself out of that. So what I recommend people doing is just, really focus on quality over quantity. Get yourself in the mindset of, look, this is a hard problem, and here are the ways that I can try to tackle it. So yes, prepare. You don't need to do 500, 1,000 problems. There's rapidly diminishing returns of interview prep, but do some prep. I'd say a couple weeks of prep is fine. You don't need to be doing like months and months and months and months of prep. A couple weeks is fine. And focus on really pushing yourself through hard problems, not giving up the moment you're stuck. There's a bunch of techniques that I can talk about if you want me to talk about them later on, about how to actually solve a problem when you're stuck. But focus on just pushing yourself through. But also don't forget about, like, at the end of the day, your goal is to actually be a good software engineer. So do some projects, get, open source, whatever, building iPhone apps, it doesn't really matter, but spend some time actually doing some projects too.
I think that's all very good information. And so I would also like to pivot a little bit about going beyond just software engineering, since you have other books other than just cracking the coding interview. Do you have any advice or recommendations for how product management interviews relate or differ from coding interviews? And can you maybe expand more about your other books as well?
Yeah. So product management are, obviously a bit different. They're actually, particularly for people with less experience, so, current college students, people just out of college, sometimes you actually can have coding interviews in a product management interview, although even there, the standards are kind of different. What they're looking for is different, but it can happen. But product management interviews are more about those ones are going to look a lot more at your behavior and kind of your personality. How do you work with people, your collaboration? Again, it doesn't mean you have to be, extroverted. You could be more quiet and passive. That's actually totally fine. But they do look at your ability to collaborate. They're going to have a higher standard of people who kind of seem like a jerk. So that matters. But they also want to see that you have, in your prior background, you've shown initiative. So that can mean, leadership roles in clubs. Honestly, different people have different perspectives. I'm not terribly impressed by leadership roles in clubs because I went to college and I know that there's a heck of a lot of clubs out there where the person who was voted president was the one who had the most friends in the club, and they're just doing the same thing that the last president did, and it's not really initiative. What I'd love to see, though, is people who have started something new. That's awesome. Or done something different than their predecessor did, or shown an initiative in some other way. So I love to see that. I love to see people who have a passion for technology. If you're looking at product management roles and you don't know how to code, I do suggest that you learn how to code. And then there's the product design interviews. So these are things that are looking at, if I ask you a question like, how would you design a bookshelf for children? That you can take that and you can break it down. You can really think about who is the user. There's more than one type of user, don't forget that. Who is the user? What do they want? What are their major goals? What are the constraints they're dealing with? And designing a solution that really focuses on the user. And those questions are really, really, really important.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm interested in product management, and that's why I'm doing both finance and computer engineering. And so when I was reading your product management, cracking the PM interview, I thought it was very interesting to see what different companies also value. Google values having really heavy technical experience versus like Amazon, where they love their MBAs and have a more business background. And so what would you say is the kind of minimum kind of CS beyond just like basic coding? Is there anything that a non-CS major can do to demonstrate their passion for technology beyond just taking maybe an intro CS class? Or would you say is that good enough?
So it's really company dependent. So, your examples of Google and Amazon are great ones. Google really wants that deep technical experience for their PMs. And Amazon values MBAs a lot often. And if you look at what the companies does, it kind of makes sense. Google has a lot of their stuff is more technical, more deeply technical, whereas Amazon, it's an e-commerce company. So yeah, a lot of it's like pricing and a lot of distribution and a lot of things that are more businessy in a way than some of Google's problems. So some of it falls into what the company wants, but there's a range. So Amazon has some very, very consumer facing stuff. And so it really depends a lot on the role as well. But as far as minimum technical experience, I think there are roles and there are PMs who have no technical background. But there are a lot of interviewers who say, look, there are so many PMs out there. Whereas if you look at the job market for developers, there are fewer qualified developers than there are job openings. So it's, the supply demand is in the favor of the candidates. For PMs, there's a lot of PMs out there looking for work at all times. And there's a lot of developers who want to become PMs. And so if you have no PM experience and you also haven't been a developer before, it's a hard transition to make, because why look at you when I can have the person who's actually been a developer at least before? And so it's really, really helpful to have some coding background or more technical background. If you're coming from like electrical engineering or computer engineering perspective, and maybe you don't have that much coding experience, you may want to either get that coding experience at the very minimum, you know, go through Code Academy, learn a little bit of coding, you don't have to be good, just learn a little bit, or look for jobs that will value that. So if you're coming from computer engineering, electrical engineering, maybe jobs at companies that make devices will value that, a PM role that works more low level. Look for jobs that leverage that experience. And that also goes, if you have no technical background, no engineering, nothing, and you're coming from, I don't know, a finance background, maybe look for a PM job that wants a finance background. So yeah, you don't have the technical stuff, try to get it, but you're never gonna be super strong technically. Go look for a job that wants a finance background.
And so what would you think about, since there's other companies in the world other than the big tech companies, is there opportunities for people who have a lesser CS background? So, you know, for your example, finance. What do you think would be the opportunities of PMing in like companies, say like JP Morgan, Bank of America, that kind of stuff, you know, finance, or even fintech firms?
Yeah.
Is there an opportunity to leverage one's like background in those more specialized finance or business type companies?
Yes and no. Product management kind of stemmed, at least, I mean, I've never looked really deep into the history of product management, but my understanding is it largely stemmed from technology, and it's largely something that, you know, tech companies came up with. And so the bulk of the product management roles are going to be within tech companies. Now, there's been some movement out of that. There have been some companies, some banks that have started to come up with PM roles. But if you want to look outside of tech companies, what I'd say is this, is that they may have roles that are effectively product management, but they don't call it that. And they may call it an analyst, which can mean like anything. There are coding roles that are analyst is like the super generic title. So they may call it something different, and just be aware of that. That technology has largely settled on this title of product management, with the exception of Microsoft, which calls it program management. But other tech companies or other non-tech companies may have a similar role that they have a different title for.
Awesome. Maybe now you can talk a little bit about your other books of, once you're, gotten through the interview and, established, can you talk about your books on cracking the careers?
Yeah. So I'm working on a new book called Cracking the PM Career. And, our inspiration for this book was noticing that, if you look at product management forums and you see all these people who are like, so I have my first job in product management, like, what do I do? And it's this product management, if you look at like software engineering, there's a kind of an understanding more or less of like, how do I be a better software engineer? For product management, there's so many different types of roles. There's so much different stuff to being a good product manager. And so we found that a lot of people just didn't really know what to do on, in the first few weeks and months as they got trained. Their manager didn't know how to train them either. They're like, read this thing and this, and then there's this blog post and maybe talk to this person. It's just really kind of scary, and it's a mess. And even as people get more experience, it's not always clear, how do you move up? How do you become both move up in the kind of on a career ladder, but also just how do you be better? And so that's kind of our inspiration for the book is, this is like, our vision is, this is going to be the book that managers give their employees. That's like, here's how you become a product manager, or here's how you get even better. And we hope the whole, COVID pandemic thing has caused some wrinkles in our plans, but we hope to come out with it in January.
Awesome. Sounds good. And so given that PM career is less defined, you talk about what you talk about in the Tech Career book?
Yeah, so Crack the Tech Career, the idea behind that book is it's for people who are like, you know, one day I would love to get a job at Google. And that might be somebody who maybe they work for a kind of small web app company, small e-commerce company in, I don't know, the Midwest. And they're like, gosh, Google sounds amazing. Like, how would I ever do that though? Like, they don't hire people like me. Or people maybe they work in Silicon Valley or Seattle or Tech Hub, but they work in something that is not in a tech role. And they're like, yeah, how do I move into tech? And so it's a lot of it's about how do you make that transition from, you know, where you're not the type of person the tech companies hire to becoming that person. So what kind of experience do they really look for? If you didn't go to a great college, how do you compensate for that? How do you do it if you're an engineer, and how do you do it if you're not an engineer? Because those are a little bit different. And then a bit about how to actually establish yourself and do better at your job and handle issues.
Awesome. So now that we're about halfway through, I'm going to start taking some questions from our Discord to see what other people would like to ask you beyond what I have been, really interested to ask you. So it seems that the most popular question is, do you think there are better ways to test problem-solving skills / coding skills besides whiteboarding / typical coding assessments?
Yeah, but we don't know if they are yet. So it's a really interesting question, and there's sort of it's complicated. What I'd say is this: I can tell you a zillion problems with the process that a lot of the big companies, the kind of standard coding algorithm process. I can tell you a zillion problems with it. And some of those problems are inherent to the process itself. And some of those are the result of companies just being bad at what they're supposed to be doing. Companies are not, even the companies that you assume obviously have like interview training programs, actually a lot of them don't. Or they have they send people to like an hour of training and it kind of sucks. So a lot of companies actually are not doing interview training. So a lot of how do we make these processes better is start actually teaching them interviewers how to interview would be a really good start. If you're already doing it, do a better job of teaching it. Interviewers, almost no company does this, but interview training should be a continuous process. People should be not just going back to training every 6 months, but they should be watching interviews and watching how other people interview every 6 months or so. So a lot of how we can make this better is just training people better. And then there's problems that are just inherent to the process. It's just, look, if you're creating a process which is designed to test essentially how smart people are, you're going to have to do that by making a problem hard, and that's going to make people nervous. And some of the people, especially the ones who are less confident, are going to mess up, not because they're not great, but because it's a scary process. And we can do a better job with that. We can give people better preparation. We can make it clearer what these interviews are about. We can make sure interviewers are actually nice, decent people. But you're not going to catch all the problems. And so there's no doubt in my mind that there are a lot of problems in the process. However, when you ask somebody behavioral questions, a lot of people say, well, gosh, I have so much experience. That should be enough. Why are you testing, see if I can know how to code? Look at all this stuff I've done. I cannot hire somebody based on what they've done. I can only do it based on how they talk about how they've done. Sorry, that's terrible. How they talk about what they've done. So, and I will tell you, even though my expertise is in coding interview prep primarily, or at least that's if I say one very specific thing, it's coding interview prep, I can more effectively prepare somebody for behavioral questions than coding questions. Because behavioral questions are even more subject to preparation than coding questions. And they are subject to all the same kind of stuff about people being nervous and all this stuff. They're subject to, are you a good bullshitter? And some people are, and some people aren't. So those are really flawed. You can give somebody coding projects, but wow, that has giving someone an offline project to do on their own time, So first of all, you do that and you run into a zillion issues around discrimination because people with children, which are disproportionately, people who have spent a lot of time with their children, which is disproportionately women, disproportionately older people, are going to have a much harder time finding that time to do the coding projects. People will, just like people go and spend time doing 500 coding problems with their friends, people are going to do these projects with their friends. So all of these processes have flaws. And I think we all need to start being more honest about, yes, I'm using this process and it kind of sucks and it's broken in all of these ways. And here are the things I'm doing to make it a little bit less broken. And one of the things that happens instead is people look at this process and says, wow, this is broken, use this other process. And then they never stop to think, actually, this other process is broken in its own ways too.
Gotcha. And I know we touched on like how to prep for these interviews and, doing 500 programming questions. Personally, I love to use HackerRank. I know my roommate last year, his goal was do 2 HackerRank problems every single day, every day until he got a job. How do you see HackerRank as a good tool for evaluating people or even just practicing? Is that something that you recommend people to do to prepare for the coding interview? And is that a good way to gauge the type of problem-solving coding skill questions there would be?
Yeah. So those are 2 separate questions. So I think you were asking both about, is it a good tool for preparing? And then on the interviewer side, is it a good tool? So on the preparing side, it's a tool. I don't know that if it's better than, the variety of other websites out there. I'm sure it's better in some ways and it's probably worse in other ways. I think one thing you just want to be careful of, I think one of the nice things about the automated tools is that, the ones where you actually type, is that it's allows you to actually make sure that your code works, which is awesome. But, and it's a really good thing. And if that's what works for you, great. Just be aware that one of the problems I see happen when people do a lot of coding, online coding or coding competitions, is that what those programs don't do is check to make sure your code doesn't suck. And in fact, because they almost kind of incentivize you to just get it done, whether it looks terrible or not, people kind of end up slowly, their coding skills degrade. And generally speaking, a lot of college students have never had anybody actually enforce good coding in the first place. So you're often starting from a bad point and kind of like getting sloppier and sloppier. And so just be really, really conscious that they are not evaluating your coding style, and the interviewers will be. So just be really, really conscious of that. But the most important thing is, focus on quality over quantity and do some prep. And if online sites work for you, great. From the interviewer side.
Can I just interject real quick? You keep saying good coding,
yes.
And as college students, we don't really know what good coding is. Can you just quickly explain what good coding looks like?
Sure. So there's a couple major aspects. One is the coding is readability, and a lot of that's around simple wins are good descriptive variable names. So calling everything ABC is not great. Generally speaking, you probably shouldn't even abbreviate things a ton. So if you have something called person count, writing it as PCNT is not that good. You should probably write person count. So some of it's variable names. A big piece is modularization. So breaking up things into concrete chunks of program. One thing I recommend candidates do is, if you explain to me your algorithm and it's okay, step 1, I do this, step 2, I do this, step 3, I do this for each time I do this. Those are your functions. You have a step 1, you have a step 2, and you have step 3. Obviously call them better things, but modularization is really, really important. And then of course, correctness and efficiency are important pieces, but those are more about the problem solving piece than the coding piece. Because if you get it efficient, you should be implementing the algorithm you came up with. So if your code isn't efficient, I will take off points for the problem solving piece. Yeah.
Awesome. And then getting back to the interviewer side. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So So I love HackerRank as a tool. Codility is the other major option. I really like HackerRank over Codility because, and there's one major reason why, which is that HackerRank allows the candidate to see the results of test cases. So the way that for anybody who doesn't know this, the way that HackerRank and Codility and all of those other sites judge if your code is correct is they have all these test cases and they run them against them, and they have some time by which you only have a certain number of seconds to run each thing. And so they judge to see if your code is sufficiently correct by saying if it literally just took too long to run, or if your code is efficient enough by saying if it took too long to run. And so what's really nice about that from the candidate side is that you know if your code is working. And what I find happens when I've had candidates use other sites like Codility when companies send out Codility tests, is that it's really easy. Like even I did one for some consulting I did. I tried their Codility test and I was like, wait, I didn't even get a perfect score. And I'm like, what happened? And it turns out that I misread a problem. And so I got like a 0, close to a 0 on a problem because I misread it. And like, that's not good. They would have just rejected me because I'm not a good enough problem solver because I misread a problem. And so I just think it's so, so powerful that HackerRank shows you the test cases. And so I will every day recommend companies HackerRank over Codility for that reason. If they're using it for, the phone interviews, I think it's a great tool for phone interviews. But I think honestly for a phone interview, it doesn't really matter. You could use anything as long as it has a good shared document editor, you can use pretty much anything. But I like HackerRank and I use HackerRank normally.
Gotcha. Another question that someone asked that I think is very topical is, what are your thoughts about the interview process going more and more digital with new tools such as HireVue coming into use? Do you have any tips for those interviewing during this new time of Zoom calls rather than person contact?
Yeah. So some of my tips are obvious but important. So, use headphones, try not to use speakerphone if you can avoid it. But certainly don't put yourself in a situation where you have to hold your phone up to your ear. So some of that obvious stuff, get a video camera so you don't have to use like a separate webcam. One of the nice things about using a webcam if you're doing a Zoom interview is that if the interviewer allows it, you can draw things on a piece of paper and just literally point your camera down at that, which can be kind of nice for drawing certain things. But most of the stuff for video, for everyday interviews would apply to in-person interviews as well. So, talk out loud, all of that advice is still there. And the biggest piece here is don't think of the video interview as being, or the online interview as being different than the in-person interview. You still need to talk out loud. You still need to communicate. You still can't go and Google stuff while you're on the interview. It's obvious and it's distracting and doesn't really help your performance when you do that. Approach it just like you would an in-person interview.
Great. Do you have any advice for interviews in tech jobs within like research roles, R&D roles? Is it the same or is it more technical if you're doing research? And does it depend on your like education level?
Yeah, it's going to depend. And so I'd say this, it depends a lot on the role. So I think standard software engineering jobs at the big companies have gotten a lot more standardized. People have kind of like, okay, this is how we do interviews. And a lot of research roles are kind of in their own little land. So, my very, very first job, I worked for Microsoft for 3 summers. My first 2 internships was at Microsoft Research. I didn't do this kind of interview process. My interview process was totally different. Research is just like in its own land, doing its own thing. And we still see a lot of that today. So I think you really have to look at that. Don't make a lot of assumptions. Figure out what they specifically are looking for. On average, I find that they are generally less focused. They're generally more likely to, err away from this kind of standard coding process and look more at your research experience. Are you well read in terms of research papers? But it depends so much on the role. And if they're hiring a new college grad into it, they may be more they're probably less focused on your research experience because you probably don't have as much of that.
Great. And so for new college grads, is there any way that we can best like search for jobs, given that a lot of quote unquote entry-level jobs require 3 years of coding experience in certain languages, or examples of I've seen one where they require 6 years of a language that's only been around for 4 years. I know a lot of hiring managers kind of just like copy and paste like descriptions of jobs and don't really tailor it for a specific opening. So do you have any advice on, do those qualifications really matter? And should you just go ahead and apply anyway, even if you don't think you match all those qualifications?
Yeah. Great question. And my simple advice is yes, apply even if you don't fully match everything. And by the way, I really want to say this especially for women. I mean, this goes for everybody. Job descriptions are very, very often poorly written. People copy and paste job descriptions. That's why you wind up with like, the person needs to have, 10 years of experience. And it's like, but this is a junior role, or years of experience in a language that's barely been out that long. A lot of it's just copy and pasting. People don't know how to write job descriptions, right? Keep in mind that it's like, look, if I were to ask you, meaning a generic software engineer, hey, can you go write me a marketing plan? You're going to suck at it, right? Like you have no experience. You're going to mess it up. Yeah, might look at some advice about how to do it, but you're going to do a pretty bad job. Software engineers don't know how to write job descriptions. That's, for the most part, they don't have any experience doing that. So a lot of them are really terribly written. And then when it falls on recruiting to do the job descriptions, they don't know the engineering, so they don't know how to do it either. Why I have a job. It's because I can do both those things. So when you look at the job descriptions, don't, look at them as like, this is kind of an flavor of what they're looking for, but don't think of them as strict rules. And the reason why I call that women in the very beginning is that there's been some data that men have a greater tendency to say, well, I basically, to do what I already said, which is I basically fit the job qualification, so I'm gonna go ahead and apply. And women have a greater tendency to say, I missed 2 of these qualifications. So, I don't actually have a master's degree. I did some research, but I don't yet have that, so I'm gonna not apply. So just, if this tends to be more meaningful for women, but it's also person dependent. If you, look at job descriptions as a hint to what they want and not strict requirements. Worst thing that happens, you apply and you get rejected, which is where you start off at anyway. So.
Great. Do you have any tips for how to talk through your reasoning during an interview, and what we can do to practice that?
Yeah. What you do to practice that is just practice it. I mean, honestly, it's, I wouldn't worry a ton about the right way to talk it through. What's important to me as an interviewer is that I have an idea of what's going on in your head. Because what that allows me, and maybe this is useful to understand, is the reason why I want you to talk out loud is that if you have misunderstood the problem, I know where you are. I know that that's happened. Think of it as like a GPS tracker for a race, where it's like, I have an idea of when you talk out loud, I have an idea of where you are in the problem, because people tend to take similar paths to the problem. I have an idea of where you are, and I can jump in to shift and help you over little pieces. Some people are awesome and really collaborative, and they're really excited and they talk a ton. And some people are a little bit more passive, it's all fine. I can work with anything. Just do what you can to talk out loud and practice that. And practice that on your own too. Like, just get used to trying to talk out loud when nobody's in the room, or when a friend's in the room. Even if it's a completely non-technical friend, just get used to talking and having somebody hear you talk.
Gotcha. That's all good advice. One other popular question that people have is lack of diversity in tech is considered a big issue. In your work with helping companies create better interviews, have you observed the interview process / practices that propagate these issues, or practices that attempt to be more inclusive?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think a lot of the advice I give companies about, so one thing I'll say that's interesting is that I do think companies care about diversity. At the same time, I think when it comes to priorities, hiring software engineers, their first priority is, can I hire some software engineers? Because I'm struggling to hire people. And then more down the list is like, diversity would be nice too. And so I always find it funny that, I worked with one big name company right while they're going through a whole lot of controversy about hiring. And like, they're like, hiring more women is a top priority. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm your consultant on hiring. And I'm a female software engineer. And I don't know if you've actually brought up diversity with me. So, and I don't think it's that they didn't care. I think it's just, this isn't their biggest priority in reality, but they care. And what I tell companies is, look, like the things you need to do to improve diversity, a heck of a lot of those are just good practices in general. Like creating more transparency around the interview process and offering tools for interview preparation. That is just a good practice in general. It's a good thing to be doing. There are people who don't know what the interview process is about. Some of those are, the majority. Some of those are that, white men sometimes don't know what interview processes are all about. It happens to be that helping those people will be a good thing in general. However, the people who don't know how to prepare for interviews, what to expect, those are also disproportionately women and minorities. So it's a good practice in general to help people, teach them about what the interview process is about. A lot of companies have found a lot of success improving diversity by just improving education around interviewing. Helps diversity, but it's just a good practice in general. Having interviewers who are, nice people is going to be particularly important for those who have imposter syndrome or who are more insecure, who feel maybe that they don't look like other software engineers. Happens to be particularly important for them. Good practice in general to have nice engineers. So a lot of things we can do to improve diversity are just pretty darn good things to do regardless. And then there's other things that are really specific diversity. So going to conferences that focus on women minorities, being more open-minded about what we expect from people, things like that.
Gotcha. And in this current time due to COVID, I know a lot of tech companies are moving out of San Francisco and are expanding beyond just the Bay Area to both other parts of the country to try to recruit developers since they can work at home. Have you seen any trends in companies expanding their geographic and talent pool for where they're looking to fill new jobs, both either within the US, or have some companies started to look at finding just competent software engineers in countries like India, Indonesia, where it's cheaper to pay developers out there?
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. I mean, I think there's been a trend for a while of companies looking beyond Silicon Valley and setting up offices in other areas. And I think COVID has probably increased that a little bit. The biggest driver really in having companies say, let's go set up offices in Austin and in Seattle and New York and in Salt Lake City, wherever, isn't just, cost is one piece of it. But honestly, the biggest piece is they just couldn't hire enough in Silicon Valley. And they feel like, look, we've kind of tapped out our candidate pool here. And if we go to these other areas, maybe we can get some of those people, maybe because they didn't want to leave their hometowns. And I think, COVID has kind of accelerated some of this. I don't feel like I have any more expertise than anybody else to say that where it'll shake out. My gut instinct is that people have a strong tendency to revert to the norm. And when, hopefully when this pandemic's over, people are still going to have their headquarters in Silicon Valley. They're still going to prefer to grow in Silicon Valley. And there's still going to be a shortage of people in Silicon Valley, and they're still going to look elsewhere.
Gotcha. And I know certain tech CEOs have had a very mixed opinion on working from home versus working in the office. Reed Hastings has said that he's seen no positive impact of working from home versus working in the office. But Twitter is saying that they want to have everyone work from home.
Yeah.
Do you think that when candidates are looking at certain companies to apply for, that looking for companies that maybe, will say that they have people in office and being able to collaborate like that, grow their career like that. Is that something that you think prospective college new grads should be looking out for in order to like grow their career?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say this as a new college grad, I think a lot of people assume that they prefer working from home, and I believe that there are a lot of people who do prefer working from home. I also think there's a lot of people who think they prefer working from home, and in reality, it kind of sucks. Part of the thing is like, look, if you're in school, would you rather be tutored one-on-one all day, or would you rather be in a group class? And a lot of people are going to get pretty bored being tutored one-on-one all day. An independent study all by yourself isn't all that fun. And so I would just be really thoughtful about who you are, what kind of environments you enjoy, and realize that working from home is not right for a lot of people. Maybe you just find it really isolating. Maybe you find it really hard to actually focus when you have other things going on in your life. I think there are some people for whom working from home is great. And I think right now what we're seeing is, hey, we just forced, pretty much everybody in certain types of jobs to work from home. And like, it doesn't work for a lot of people. And it is an unfair comparison because a lot of people have kids, and working from home when you also have, some kids at home is not, and you have to now homeschool them. It's not the same thing as working from home when they're not at home. But I don't feel like in the last 6 months, I've seen people being like, yeah, this work from home thing sure is awesome. I don't think I've seen that overwhelmingly from employees or from companies.
Gotcha. All right, well, I think we're coming up on the hour, and we don't want to take up too much of your time. Again, thank you so much for coming here and talking to everyone here at IvyHacks. And again, to anyone who's watching this who hasn't read either Cracking the Coding Interview or Cracking the PM Interview, I highly recommend those books. They're filled with so much good knowledge. Anything else you want to say?
Nope. Thank you so much for having me here.
All right. Awesome. Have a great day. And everyone else, head on to your next events. Thank you.
Thank you.